Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into a little stretch here of football anticipation and baseball reality right now. The Orioles taking a weekend series with the Boston Red Sox, making it interesting to the end. Clearly, Kramer's my favorite guy on Sunday because, I mean, I was with my dude Stan. He's like the pitcher, and he was like touching his hair. He's like, the guy with the hair. I'm like, yeah, the guy that looks like me. So I'll throw that out. We got an NFL schedule coming on Wednesday. Vegas, Chicago. We're going to get a Denver trip out of this, Detroit trip out of this. So big week ahead. Nothing bigger than the Baffert, the scandal, and the Preakness and all that, but still plenty going on. It almost feels like I got two shots and the pandemic's over, Luke.
There you go. There you go. I mean, life coming back to in full force as it goes with that. But
I was at full force at Costas on Mother's Day. Believe me.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I think, you mentioned the schedule, Ravens. We haven't had a chance to talk about Alejandro Villanueva. I think post-draft and now with the schedule, which used to come out right before the draft, but now it appears it's kind of settled into this second week of May, mid-May. Sounds like the league kind of wants to make another event. Imagine that, the NFL dominating something at every part of the calendar, to some degree. Maybe the only time they don't is late June through late July. That's the 1 month where the NFL truly does go away.
That's when Roger goes into the basement and sits in that brown chair.
Exactly.
That up on stage, I think.
But this is a fun time of year from the standpoint of the draft's now over. Rookie camp will be this coming weekend. We'll get an official list of rookie free agents, and we'll debate which 1, 2, 3 guys have a shot to make the 53-man roster. As we know that the Ravens almost definitely every year have at least one. But between that, the schedule coming out, we've known the opponents, most of the opponents we've known for years. You find, by the end of the regular season, you find out who the 16, now 17 teams or 17 games they're going to play in 2021. But all of these things give you more context. Once we find out the schedule, we're going to know who the Ravens kick off the season against. We'll be, from now until September, we'll be talking about counting down to the week 1 opener against whoever they're playing, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, whoever it might be. So it makes it feel a little more real. And with Dick Cass this past week having sent letters to season ticket holders talking about the team at this point in time anticipating a full stadium. And we know a lot can happen between now and September, but the optimism is there for full capacity, and which would be obviously a major difference from where the Ravens were last year, where they had some fans for a couple games and that's about it. So, it's exciting. We're talking about a team that's won 25 regular season games over the last 2 years and are trying to take down the Kansas City Chiefs, break through that divisional round wall that they've hit the last couple of years and make it to a Super Bowl. So it's fun in that way. And Alejandro Villanueva being signed this week gives the Ravens at least their short-term answer at right tackle. And Eric DeCosta said it after the draft concluded. He uttered that phrase that Ozzie Newsome, we heard him say so many times over the years post-draft, reminding everyone we don't have to play any games until September, which isn't, it's not a cop-out, because there's certainly times where they've had an answer that they may, or they've had a question, they think they have an answer, and then they find out they don't. So time will tell. But in the case of Villanueva, gives you a veteran option at right tackle. And I think something that was something I pointed out as far as my concern in trading Orlando Brown, gives you someone who has extensive experience at left tackle, which when you have your all-pro left tackle coming off of 2 ankle surgeries, I think that's something important to recognize. But Ravens get that done, and it's at least another perceived answer to some of their questions that they've faced this offseason.
Well, there's always a plan, right? That's the one thing we know, right? Like when the draft's over, it's easy for us to sit here and say, oh my God, they didn't draft on the line. What are they going to, they sort of know what they're doing, and they have a plan, and they will enact that plan. And as much as before the draft, I always said, we always figure out what Ozzie's thinking, when we're on the clock, right? We're now at that point with Eric where they're playing chess. They're not playing checkers. I mean, and as much as that Earl Thomas thing, and I think Eric talking about that publicly as he has, as being a little triggered, to make that happen, that he doesn't want to make that happen, make a mistake like that again, that, they take their mistakes hard out there and they don't want to make those mistakes, and playing all of these cards, whether it's dealing Orlando Brown a little early, whether it's waiting another year to sign Lamar Jackson, whether it's waiting until after the draft to sign a right tackle or, an edge rusher, whatever's going to, they don't do the paperwork wrong. They really don't. They get these things right.
Well, and I mean that's really what you can say about the best organizations year after year after year. I mean, anyone can, we see these teams will go through these cycles where someone will look pretty good for a couple years, right? But the teams that sustain it over the long run are the teams that are thinking about the long run. I think that's what's been kind of fascinating to see how Kansas City has approached this offseason. I mean, they clearly identified their weakness in the Super Bowl. That's obvious, right? Their offensive line got Patrick Mahomes killed, and it cost them a Super Bowl because the injuries piled up and they didn't have enough depth there. So what have they done? They've attacked their offensive line with, to quote John Harbaugh and the Harbaugh family, an enthusiasm unknown to mankind in terms of spending money, acquiring Orlando Brown, giving up draft picks, very much putting themselves in a position where they're going to be really tight against the cap in the not too distant future, but they're looking at it from a much more short-term lens. And that's not necessarily wrong. And they're clearly banking on the fact that, when their cap gets tighter, they still have Patrick Mahomes. We've seen the Ravens not necessarily, I mean, you look at their moves, it'd be hard to argue that the Ravens have, quote, gone all in 2021 in the way that they've proceeded. Okay, sure. They signed Sammy Watkins to a 1-year deal. Kevin Zeitler's on the wrong side of 30. Villanueva's on the wrong side of 30. But it's been much more a mix of, making improvements for 2021. But the Orlando Brown trade is a perfect example of thinking beyond that. They get a first round pick and they swap, they trade their second round pick to Kansas City. But if they were truly all about 2021 and being hell-bent on this needing to be the year, you probably don't trade Orlando Brown. You probably play it out with them and then take your comp pick in 2023. So but it's fascinating to see how these different teams approach it. I mean, I think even look at the Ravens from a draft standpoint. And this was something I touched on a little bit at BaltimorePositive.com. And I know Eric was asked about it after the draft. What did we always know the Ravens to be very comfortable doing? Selecting small school guys, right? I mean, Joe Flacco at Delaware, Ladarius Webb. I mean, go down the list. I mean, Matt Judon. So many different guys from all these small schools, whether it's FCS, whether it's Division II. Look at their drafts the last 3 years. I think you'd have to look at it and see that they have really trended more towards big schools, Power 5 schools. I mean, I think the smallest schools that they've drafted from over the last 2 or 3 years has been like Louisiana Tech and SMU. It's been mainly Power 5 schools. Now, do I think that there's, that they suddenly don't like small school guys? No, not necessarily. But I think they identified the challenges of last season with the pre-draft process being interrupted by the pandemic. And then, of course, going through a whole college football season, I think the Ravens, some might call it risk aversion. I think it's just maximizing the information that you have. Probably trended a little more towards, we're going to go for the big school guys. There's a little more, we didn't get to scout in the same way or have the same human interaction in the same way, that maybe we couldn't take as deep a dive with some of these small school prospects. And we leaned on that. So it's evolving. I mean, the way that the Ravens pick, identify, sign, scout football players in 2021 is not the same as it was 5 years ago. Certainly not the same as it was 20 years ago. And that's a good thing, right? You always want to be evolving. John Harbaugh loves to say you're either getting better or you're getting worse. You're not staying the same. So the Ravens are always going to try to get better. I mean, every team does. It's just a matter of which ones are effectively doing that. And I think you look at the Ravens, while they still certainly have some question marks, I think you do look at what they've done to this point in the offseason where they're right there. We can debate the Ravens, Kansas City, Buffalo, certainly. I think a lot of people like what Cleveland's done coming off of an 11-5 season and really improving their defense on paper. I think people are really loving what teams like Miami and the Chargers are doing. We'll see how it plays out. But all these teams are jockeying, and that's where you look at the Ravens trusting their process, doing what they think is right in terms of not just 2021, but keeping themselves in position to continue to have success, knowing that, there's going to be a 9-figure contract coming for your quarterback much sooner rather than later. So, you can't just be thinking about 2021 unless you're trying to maximize that window and then knowing that you're going to have more pain down the road.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter and on Instagram and Facebook and all the places, celebrating Mother's Day, celebrating his new uncledom coming down the line here, and certainly still watching a lot of Orioles baseball. I was over Costas with my dude Stan Jablonski, cracking some crabs, getting ready for the crab cake tour. We're going to be over at Fadley's to start things here this week with John Sarbanes is going to get us started. We're going to talk about his family's addiction to Fadley's, and then I'm going over to Costas. We're going to try to corral Bucky Lasik and talk some East Side as well. So crab cake tours kicking off. I'm over there. People are watching the Oriole game, Luke. It's a close game. The Kramer kids pitching. Give me a little primer on the Orioles right now, because this would be the scene in Major League where I'm like, they're not as crappy as maybe I thought they'd be. We're not that far out, but we're almost on the quarter pole. We're getting there.
Yeah, we are. And what's strange about it is they've played pretty well on the road, and they've been terrible at Camden Yards. They're 4-13 through Sunday's game, as you mentioned. Dean Kramer, who pitched pretty well. The question with him is getting deep enough into games, and some of that's by design at this point. Look at how the Tampa Bay Rays have operated the last few years with terrific pitching staffs. You're seeing teams from an analytics standpoint trying to avoid that third time through the order. In the case of someone like Dean Kramer, I think, even going back to last year when he pitched well in his starts that he received in September, getting deep, lots of deep counts. He gets the strikeouts. Didn't necessarily strike out a bunch of guys on Sunday, but it's kind of what you see with young pitchers. And for the Orioles, the success stories are obvious. John Means is a Cy Young candidate right now. He's been that, even before the no-hitter last week, he's been pitching at a very high level, going back to last September where he seemed to kind of find himself a little bit after a rough start to the season and some trials off the field as well in his personal life with his father. But John Means has been terrific. Matt Harvey has been okay, certainly better than I expected. He's been solid for the most part. Certainly not the guy he was 6, 7, 8 years ago, and with the Dark Knight and Gotham and the Mets and all of that. But okay, I think what's been a little more disheartening beyond just talking about the generalization of them struggling so much on the road at home after playing pretty well on the road. For me, it has been the young pitchers. Kind of that next tier, that next wave of young pitchers. We saw Dean Kramer and Keegan Aiken pitch well at the end of last year, and we knew that it was a strange season. It's September, rookie pitchers. You're not making too much out of it. At the same time, hey, they were going up against the Yankees. They were going up against some good teams. It's not as though they were just going up against cream puffs. So fast forward to this year, Kramer was okay Sunday, but we've seen him have his struggles. Bruce Zimmerman started out pretty well. He's struggling. He's back at AAA right now. And some of it's by design. They're trying to manage innings. Keep in mind, we're talking about guys who did not have a full minor league season last year, 60-game regular season in 2020. Now you're going back to 162. Now minor league seasons have started, albeit a month late. There's a lot of load management going on here, in addition to, wanting these guys to pitch and develop and become better pitchers. So there are challenges that every team from the Orioles all the way up to the Boston Red Sox or the LA Dodgers or whoever you want to point out as far as contenders go. But seeing, I mentioned Kramer, I mentioned Zimmerman. Keegan Aiken did not make the club out of camp because he struggled in the spring with his command. And Zach Lowther, who made his first major league start on Saturday night. None of these guys are DL Hall or Grayson Rodriguez as far as being cream of the crop, blue chip pitching prospects. I mean,
Well, the
you're talking
kid
about
Saturday night looked a little overmatched, right?
He did, but at the same time, look at his minor league numbers. I mean, Zach Lowther has been successful at every level of the minor leagues he had pitched. However, having lost last season, he didn't have a season at AAA to kind of grow and take his lumps. He was at the alternate site, and they were kind of developing. I've called it development by concentrate. And someone like him, I think that's rough because from an age standpoint, from a kind of natural progression that he had, from a time standpoint, he should be ready to go, right? But he didn't have a AAA season last year. So how do you kind of marry those two realities? And that's not to make excuses for the Orioles, but that's why I wrote it at BaltimorePositive.com last week that this feeling of the minor league season starting, that Grayson Rodriguez made a start at Aberdeen and DL Hall pitched at Bowie, and Yusniel Diaz finally getting to play at AAA Norfolk, and Adley Rutschman is at Bowie now. It kind of makes you feel like, all right, this long, painful rebuilding process that in some ways, through no fault of their own because of the pandemic, in some ways it felt like it was brought to a standstill because you don't have minor league games. I mean, you can only do so much at these alternate sites. So it was nice to see. It's nice to see results again. But, someone like Zach Lowther, who it's way too, it would be insanely premature to write him off. But it was disappointing to see him not be more competitive on Saturday night. There's no question about that. I mean, he had a couple strikeouts. He missed some bats. He made some good pitches at times. And then at other times, he looked in over his head. So you'd like to see better there. But, he's their number 10 prospect. So he's someone they like. So I think it's important. You want patience. But, and this is, you mentioned kind of where I am with the Orioles right now. Let's bring it back to John Means. And we talked about this a little bit in the aftermath of the no-hitter. And we didn't want to dwell too much on it, but the discussion inevitably comes back to what is his future? What does he look like? And let's keep in mind, let's be very clear. This is John Means' third full year in the major leagues. They have 3 more years of club control after this year. So you don't have to do anything right now, nor should they necessarily do anything right now. However, when you're looking at all these other pitchers, I just mentioned, go down the list of, Aiken, Kramer, Zimmerman, Zach Lowther. I'll throw Mike Baumann in there, even though he got shut down late last year at the alternate site, a little bit of a forearm issue, that there's still some uncertainty there. They're kind of the next wave. And then you can get into Kyle Bradish, who they got in the Dylan Bundy deal, someone they like, and Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall are the Cadillacs, right? They're they're what Mike Messina was 30 years ago. I mean, that's they're first round picks, and they have tremendous stuff. But the more that you can get out of kind of this next tier of guys, this next wave of guys, and we know that I named 5 guys. They're not all going to become major league starters. You hope 2 of them can be mainstays in your rotation. Maybe 1 or 2 other guys can be guys in the bullpen that are really valuable. And there's going to be 1 or 2 that just don't make it. And we just know that that's how it works. But the more of those guys that can be, quote, hits, guys that can be legitimate answers for them, I think it increases the likelihood of John Means sticking around. If you have this whole tier that doesn't develop and doesn't work, and then you're waiting another couple years for DL Hall and Grayson Rodriguez to prop up your rotation, and John Means is kind of carrying it in the way that he kind of is right now, then it probably increases the likelihood that he gets moved at some point in the next 18 to 24 months, somewhere in that territory. With any player, from John Means and Trey Mancini all the way down to Adley Rutschman, if you want to throw his name there. No one's untouchable in this organization. No one should be. But, and this is where I'll come back to the entertainment side of this, the fan side of this, of trying to be as patient as you can, understanding there is a plan, but at some point in time, when do you flip that switch in going from rebuilding, not being concerned with wins and losses at the major league level and trying to collect assets, to being at a point where it's time to start trying to do this, and you have enough young options where then you're filling in the gaps from a payroll standpoint of, okay, what do you need? You need a second baseman? Who's out there? Who can we acquire via trade? with this surplus at a certain position and acquire? What free agent can we sign? So when do they get to that point? That's where it's hard to say. I'll remind everyone, the 2012 Orioles won 93 games. No one thought they were going to win 93 games that year. And that was the start of what was a pretty fun 5-year window. Did they reach the promised land and the pinnacle? No, they didn't, but it was pretty fun. But my point is,
should have beaten the Yankees that night, by the way.
Sure, right. But that 2010 season was a disaster until Buck Showalter came on. And at the end of the year, they go 34-23, and you're thinking, oh wow, what happened in 2011? They really struggled for 5.5 months, and then they played well at the end of the season, and they beat the Red Sox. But they were still a 90+ loss team. And then 2012, it just happened. As much as we always think of these things in terms of wanting it to be linear, right? You want it to be that gradual, okay, you win 5 more games this year and 5 more games the year after that and 5 more. It doesn't, in fact, it rarely happens that way. I feel it. It happens that way sometimes, but I think for the Orioles, that's where you want to see enough growth in certain individuals now and next year. And then, if you see enough of that, that's when, if you're Mike Elias, then you're making the call. Okay, when does this transition from, focus on the farm, focus on the and not that those things will, those things won't wane. That's an ongoing thing, but all focus is on that and being in a collecting talent kind of mode to maximizing wins at the major league level. And they're not there yet. I think that's obvious, but at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and say that necessarily means they're 4 years away from that either. That's why it's so critical to me for this current wave of minor league pitching that, isn't the best that they have to offer. They don't have the highest ceiling, but it's still a pretty interesting group. It's where if you can get 2, maybe 3 of those guys to really kind of look like they can at least be back half of the rotation, major league caliber starting pitchers, then I think they can move a little more quickly in that process. But it is deflating to kind of see how that tier of pitching prospects has started off 2021. There's no question.
He is Luke Jones. You can find him, Baltimore Luke. You can certainly find him back at the ballpark next weekend as the Birds come back and Preakness comes in and Bob Baffert's crooked. And, oh, man, we got a mess on our hands. We're going to have a lot of Preakness coverage before the week's over. Marty McGee's going to be joining me from the Daily Racing Forum. My dear friend Dick Girardi be joining me from Philly. Hearing from, let's see here, Lafitte Pinkai is checked in. Donna Brothers is checked in. Kenny Mayne is checked in. Randy Moss is checked in. So I'm going through the horse racing world here as we get ready for the running of the Preakness this week. Just weird times. I thought the whole pandemic weirdness was all behind us, but we're going to have an NFL schedule before the week's over, and we're watching baseball and politics and getting ready for a crab cake tour. I'll start at Fadley's and at Costas this week. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.